Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the JGLS lecture series. Today, I hope you are all at home and safe. And today we have Professor Manveen Singh with us, who is an Associate Professor and Associate Dean Academic Affairs at Jindal Global Law School. He is also the Assistant Director of the Center for Intellectual Property and Technology at Jindal Global Law School. Professor, thank you for joining us today for this webinar. We welcome you. Also, I would like to inform all the attendees that we'll be taking your questions at the end of the webinar. Professor, now on to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity, and sincere apologies to all the attendees for the delay due to some technical glitch at our end. The topic that I'm going to address today is something that is falling in a very niche area of patent law. It's licensing of SEPs and the FRAND conundrum. Now, at the very outset, it seems as if it's a topic which probably would not give too much of a hint as to what exactly is the entire background to this topic, which is why I'll basically spend the first few minutes talking about what exactly is the issue here. Now, intellectual property, and more so patent law, has undergone a massive evolution in the last at least 2 to 3 decades. And one of the aspects of patent law that has attracted a lot of attention in the last couple of decades, or last 2.5 decades, is standard essential patents and the aspect of their licensing. But before I begin to talk about SEPs and their licensing, I also must give a brief backdrop as to where is this falling exactly in the entire scheme of things concerning standards and standard setting. Now, standards go back a long way. They go back to the ancient times when we had something like the length of an arm being considered as a certain standard of measurement, the L as such. And then slowly the transition happened, industrialization happened, and we basically had units of measurement. And then the most common example in the modern day era is the railway gauge length. So 4 feet and 8 inches basically is the standard unit of measurement. Similarly, we have technological standards, and most of the technological standards are developed by voluntary organizations called SSOs or STOs. Now, SSOs stand for standard setting organizations, STOs stand for standard development organizations. They are basically the same thing, but there are 2 different terminologies given to the same term. In the European Union and the UK, it's termed as standard setting organizations, whereas in the US it is termed as standard development organizations. What do these organizations do? They basically develop standards, which I will basically just focus on the technological standards. So what's happening here is that you have different technology owners or patent owners coming together under one roof, collaboratively setting standards for the entire industry, so that there is a possibility of coherence, interoperability, and a certain sort of uniformity. So there's a single standard. Let's say, for instance, 3G or 4G, or very soon we are going to have 5G, or the Wi-Fi standard or the Bluetooth standard. There's a standard in place so that any mobile phone can communicate with another mobile phone through a certain standard which is same across the board. Now, SEPs are those patents. So of course we are talking about the domain of patents as such. Standard essential patents are those patents which basically have been termed as such because development without using those patents and infringing upon those patents is not possible. So if anybody is to develop a technology, you will have to involve that standard. You will have to use that standard. Using that standard means permission required from the using that patent, means permission required from the patent holder. So if you have to use a standard essential patent, a normal patent which now is under the status of an SEP, if you have to use that SEP, you need permission from the patent holder. That could be in the form of a license, that could be in the form of assignment, could be anything. But if you use that particular technology without the permission of the patent holder, you of course are infringing. And those patents which cannot be used without their being infringed by an individual are basically called standard essential patents. Now, in standard development and in technological standard development, SEPs are basically the backbone, because without licensing of SEPs, you cannot move forward. You cannot develop a standard of the nature of 5G, which will involve thousands of patents coming together in one place under one roof, or patent holders coming together rather under one place, under one roof in one place, and pooling together their technology. But of course, this is not being done for free, because they have invested a lot of money on R&D in order to make sure that when they license their technology, they get something in return. Everybody who's investing money in R&D would require adequate returns on investment. Now, these people enter into some sort of a contractual arrangement with the SSOs, or so it has been deemed, although there are question marks on the exact status of this relationship between patent holders and SSOs has also been questioned. I mean, there have been question marks with respect to this. This has been questioned by several quarters, that what exactly is the enforcement mechanism involved here. If somebody says, I am not going to license my patented technology to you, what happens? Do you have a recourse? Or do you just have to give in and say, okay, fine, no problem. If you don't want to license, you are the owner, it's your call. So what happens here is this: there is a contractual arrangement involved. The SEP holder here would, as a part of this contract, say that I give you my patent or patented technology to be included as a part of the standard, so for the standard development, and in return, I agree to license these patents to anyone and everyone who wishes to use this patented technology subsequently during the implementation of that standard. So let's say there are two parties here, innovators and implementers. Who are these innovators? Innovators are companies like Qualcomm, Nokia, Ericsson, Apple, who basically have patents, who are indulging in R&D, who are indulging in innovation, who are coming up with new and new technology every day. And on the other hand, you have players that are the implementers. They fall in the category of implementers. Who are these? Micromax, Lava, Intex, iBall, these kind of Gioni. These are the so-called implementers. Who are what they're going to do basically is they're going to just license this technology from you. They're going to simply implement that standard. So if Micromax or Lava or Intex is going to make a 5G phone tomorrow, they will have to make sure that their phone is on the lines of what the basic minimum standard for a 5G phone should be. So in order to ensure that that's the case, they will license this technology from, of course, the so-called patent holder. And it's not just one patent holder. There are so many patent holders. So everybody has demands. Everybody wants return on investment. How do we ensure that there is a return on investment? By putting in place a certain process, a certain procedure, and that happens under the aegis of organizations known as standard setting organizations. So what they're doing is they're facilitating the entire arrangement where innovators and implementers are coming together under one roof and entering in a negotiation. So innovators or patent holders would tend to say, we will license our technology to you on terms that are, and here comes the most important and the most controversial aspect, fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. It is a combination of three terms: fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. And the short form that we derive from this is FRAND. So what's happening here is SSOs have somehow managed to convince SEP holders or patent holders that we will include your technology as a part of our standard, by which the result is that you will have a bigger volume effect in the market, because your technology has now become a part of the standard. Your exploitation power has gone up, because no mobile phone manufacturer who wants to make a 5G phone will be able to proceed further without using your technology. So they have to inevitably use your technology, which is why your power is more. But we cannot allow you to misuse this power, which is why we want you to give us an undertaking. What is this undertaking? This undertaking is, I so and so agree to license my patents to any person, ABC, whosoever wishes to use this technology, on terms that are fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. So FRAND terms. But the buck doesn't stop there, because the problems are just about to begin. Anyone who has a lot of power suddenly coming his or her own way will get his head turned at some point. So he'll probably feel that, oh, why not use this power? Why not use this to my advantage? And that's exactly what happens with SEP holders. Yes, they would have given this commitment to SSOs prior to their technology being used or being included as a part of the standard. So that's the ex ante stage. That's the term that we use. So prior to the development of the standard. However, the issue arises when the technology becomes a part of the standard and then the head turns. And the patent holders tend to think, oh, well, why not utilize this power that we've got and influence these implementers, or kind of, let's say, exploit these implementers. Influence wouldn't be the right term. Exploit these implementers to, or forcing them into giving more favorable or higher royalties to us, or pay us higher royalties, because we know without our technology being used by these people, they cannot move forward. So there's no way out. They cannot pull out now. 5G standard is developed. SSO is also in a bad shape now, because SSO has already developed that standard with everybody's involvement. Now we are at a juncture where there is hardly a way back. There is no way back now, more or less, practically speaking. On paper, yes, there is a way back, because you can ditch that patent holders technology, but it's easier said than done. In reality, that's not so easy, because you would have invested so much of time on developing a standard, so many people were involved, and suddenly the patent holder says, well, I'm not going to license on FRAND terms, or the so-called FRAND terms that I am quoting, according to me, are FRAND. But any other rational person, any other objective individual would say, or would not agree with this aspect of fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory, because it actually isn't fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. But again, the issue is, if innovator or patent holder says this is fair, reasonable, non-discriminatory, implementer says this is not fair, reasonable, non-discriminatory, then what exactly is FRAND? Who will tell the world, or who will tell these people what exactly is FRAND? And that's where, you know, the court's role comes in. And I would go back to 2012, when the Microsoft versus Motorola case took place in the US. And that was the first instance where the Wi-Fi standard was at the center of the dispute. Video compression Wi-Fi standard was the center of the dispute. And the issue was, what is fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory in terms of. And the court actually, you know, the district court, Washington District Court, basically had to look at the Georgia Pacific factors. So there was a case earlier in the US where certain factors were specified which could be used for the determination of reasonable royalties. And as a part of these Georgia Pacific factors, they were listed. There were 15 factors listed. But what the court felt was that these factors need to be modified, because we are dealing with standard essential patents. We are not talking about any normal patent. So in case of SEPs, you have to look at other factors, like what exactly is the contribution of the technology to the standard, and then what is the contribution of the standard to the product, and then how is this technology better than the alternatives on offer. So if we pick technology A over B and C, then how was A better than B, and how was A better than C? So what was who was the nearest competitor, and by what extent is this competitor better than its next rival, or with how is A better than B, or how is A better than C? So you have to consider those aspects as well. Now the court modified these Georgia Pacific factors and brought them down to 8. So now from 15 they brought them down to 8, and they basically said that, you know, these are the factors that we will consider. So in short, what the court basically looked at was the fact that there cannot be a single rate as FRAND. You cannot term 2.5% of the total value of the handset, for instance. So 2.5% of $500 is not the royalty that can be termed as FRAND. You cannot fix one single value. Rather, you have a range, a FRAND range, and your FRAND rate will technically fall within that FRAND range. So it's easier. And that way, it's more practical, it's more feasible. You have a FRAND range and you have a FRAND rate that falls within that range. That gives enough scope to the parties involved, innovators and implementers, both here to negotiate. You have scope to maneuver around that one value. So he fixed a FRAND rate. Judge Robert, James Robert, he fixed a FRAND range and he fixed a FRAND rate, and the rate would fall in that range. And also he said that in terms of calculating what exactly is this rate, is this FRAND rate, we have to look at the contribution of the particular patented technology to the standard, and subsequently the contribution of the standard to the product, so the implementer's product. So we have to look at what is being contributed, and then we come to a certain range and a rate. So that was the first case. Then another case came around, in re innovatio, and in that case also the judge deciding upon the FRAND rate looked at what was held in the Microsoft versus Motorola case and said that, you know, I agree with the range bit, but unfortunately FRAND rate can only be one. However, according to my calculation, the FRAND rate that I have calculated, or that I have come to finally derive, is falling within that range that was proposed in the Microsoft versus Motorola case. So although I agree that there could be a range, but I am deciding on a single rate. But the rate is falling within that range that was earlier proposed in the Microsoft versus Motorola case. And as far as the rate taking into consideration the contribution of the technology was concerned, it did the same thing. It said contribution of the patented technology to the standard, what is it contributing, and then subsequently what is being contributed to the implementer's products as well. So you will not be given the benefit of your technology being included as a part of the standard. So just because the standard is going to be utilized across the world, you will not get the benefit of that worldwide utilization. Your benefit or your return on investment or your royalty will be only a reflection of your technology's contribution to the standard, and not the standard's overall standing in the entire world market. So that was one important thing that came out of these judgments. And then there was a sudden change in the scenery, because Ericsson versus D-Link happened. And in Ericsson versus D-Link, a rather different approach was taken by the judge. And what was held was that we will not look at the contribution of the technology to the standard or to the implementer's products. We are ditching that aspect. So for the determination of FRAND, of course, there's one rate, no doubt about that. And we are also not going to look at Georgia Pacific factors. So they are also ditched. They are out of the way. We are only going to look at basically the incremental value of the invention. Now there was a new term devised for FRAND. How do you determine FRAND? You look at what is the incremental value of this invention. Incremental value would, in simple terms, be how is this patented technology, or by how much is this patented technology better than the next best alternative on offer. So the incremental value of the invention would be that you have two technologies, A and B. A is slightly better than B, but that slight bit of betterment over B is what is going to cause A to be selected, number one, and number two, the owner of this technology A to benefit out of that inclusion in the standard by virtue of the contribution of the technology, not by virtue of the fact that, oh, the standard has become so popular. So popularity of the standard, the wide extent of the standard is nothing related to what you will get as a patent holder. You will only get the due share with respect to how good your technology is over the next best alternative, because it was a straight choice between picking either A or B. So if A was picked over B, then why was A picked? What was the difference between A and B? This difference basically is what's going to allow you to get royalty. So this was termed as FRAND in Ericsson versus D-Link. And the similar aspect of FRAND was discussed in the next case, that is, so I'm just talking about the important cases. And in fact, these are all landmark cases as far as FRAND is concerned, because every case had its own unique position in the entire discussion surrounding FRAND. CSIRO versus Cisco, pretty much the same ruling as Ericsson versus D-Link. A single rate, no Georgia Pacific factors. In fact, most of them were discounted, very few were considered. But primarily the important thing was again the aspect of incremental value of the invention or the patented technology being taken into consideration. So when we say that what exactly is this FRAND rate, the FRAND rate is the rate based on the incremental value of the invention over the next best alternative. So there was some concurrence there. And these were cases happened. Then there was a major shift because all this was happening in the US. And EU, UK, we didn't really have any major development. So there was a lot of jurisprudence coming out of or flowing out of the judicial decision in the US. And then suddenly we come to the UK. So what happens in the UK? A landmark judgment came out from the UK court, and that was Unwired Planet versus Huawei. And that was important because the approach taken by Justice Birch in this case was completely different to the approach adopted by the judges' counterparts in the US. Georgia Pacific out of the way. Things such as contribution of the standard to the product or contribution of the technology to the standard or technology to the product all out of the way. Incremental value of the invention was something that was kept as it is. Single rate was kept as it is, and that was the main point of discussion here. Single rate, because the US courts were pretty much inclined towards the fact that you cannot have a single FRAND rate. You must have a FRAND range because you also need to give some amount of leverage to these parties, the two parties, implementers and innovators, to negotiate a license, to be given a window within which these two things would, within which the rate and counter rate would be placed, and then they would somehow zero in on something as the final rate. But with a single rate, you are basically saying you have to be absolutely spot on. The moment you digress from this, you are off the FRAND mark, which was too heavy a burden. But anyway, the UK court felt that that's how it is going to be. And another important thing that the UK court said was FRAND is a global rate. Now this was another game changer. Global rate would mean IP rights are territorial in nature, patent rights are territorial in nature, which means that it is not necessary that you might have a patent granted simultaneously in all the countries at the same time. You might have a patent granted in certain countries, not granted in certain countries, granted in certain countries at some point, granted in other countries at a different point, about to lapse in one country, still a long way to go in another country, scope limited in one country, scope more in another country, value more in one country, value less in another country. All these things have to be considered when you look at patents being filed in different countries, because of course patent rights are territorial, so there is a difference in how they're going to be perceived. So Justice Birch in this case said FRAND is a global rate. Why? Because both the parties are operating in more than 40 countries. One is operating in 42 or 46 countries, the other one is operating in 51 countries. So why are you going on a country by country basis? Why cannot be FRAND just one single global rate? But for that determination of that global rate, it did ended up dividing the world in different markets. So there was a category of main markets like US, EU, India, Japan, Korea, and other markets, which will involve all the other countries around the world. So they divide the world in two parts. And they said that the rate there would be a global rate, but at the max you could basically divide this rate into these two regions, the world into these two regions, and whichever countries you fall in, or your patent portfolios are major in these countries, or your business is more in these countries, you can go about negotiating accordingly. And the other approach that they adopted in terms of calculation of FRAND was, now this is another aspect that I wanted to discuss, but of course, now is the right time to discuss. Royalty stacking. What is royalty stacking? Now, what is royalty stacking is, there are multiple people holding different patents or patented technologies. Now what happens is that everyone wants their technology to become a part of the standard because there's extra power coming with it, there's a volume effect, there is better commercialization. And the second aspect is that you would also want adequate returns on investment. Now, if there are 50 people who are contributing their technology, patented technology to the standard, 50 of them want you to basically, you as in the implementers to, or a single implementer to pay each one of those 50 people and give them 2%, 3%, whatever. By this calculation, the implementer will go bankrupt on day one. implementer will never operate in a at a level of profit. It'll always be in loss. And royalties keep on stacking, which is why they call it royalty stacking, because you keep on paying royalties to n number of people, and ultimately, you'll barely be able to save any money out of a single handset, a single mobile phone. So to avoid this royalty stacking, what happens is there's another thing kept in mind when we are deciding FRAND royalties, and that is the top-down royalty approach. The top-down royalty calculation approach says you first calculate the total number of patents and the contributions of every patent holder, number of patents according to the patent portfolio, add them all up, see what is the aggregate, and then whatever the total amount is, you start apportioning that amount to every person according to their contribution. So if a person has 5 patents, you give him more royalty. If a person has 2 patents, you give him less royalty. If a person has 20 patents, you give him even more royalty. If a person has 1 patent, you give him little royalty, so on and so forth. So basically apportioning according to your contribution. But if everybody is at liberty to discuss, I will want 5% from you, I will want 3% from you, 2% from you, then the poor implementer will basically just die on the very first day. He'll never see any profit in the rest of his life, during the rest of his life, that okay, this is what I'm being asked to do. Now everybody's charging me so much money, everybody's after profit. So there has to be some cutoff there. So Albert Plan versus Huawei also talked about this, and they said that we adopt the top-down royalty approach, but that was adopted just to make sure that the royalty calculation is within a check. So it was a cross-checking measure as such. And they discussed about the fact that we look at the incremental value of the invention, and we look at the fact that how has your technology contributed to the standard as a whole. So this really raised an alarm in the US judicial circle, that oh, suddenly the judgment out of the UK, they haven't adhered to anything that we have said, but they have devised their own method of calculation of FRAND royalties. And there was a lot of backlash also, to a very restrained sort of a backlash, but there was backlash from the academic community as well as the judicial community in terms of the decision in Anwar versus Huawei, because the discussion was that there cannot be a single rate. There's always a range, and to say there's a single rate is kind of unfair. And the other aspect was that that US system is very inward looking, which means that this decision in Huawei versus Anwar Plan versus Huawei is not going to have major repercussion in the US judicial circle. And then came the last case, which was TCL versus Ericsson, another US case. And yet again, they said that there cannot be a single FRAND rate. So US was pretty much sticking to its approach of FRAND more being in the nature of a range rather than a rate. And they said that you can actually divide the world in 3 regions. So it's US and US, EU. Rate in the US, the FRAND rate in the US will be more than other jurisdictions, because the patent portfolio of the patent holder in TCL versus Ericsson was stronger in the US as opposed to the other countries. So here was another approach that the court put forward, and the court said you could actually divide the world in different regions and then come to the conclusion based on those regions that in which region are the patent portfolios more prominent, more heavy, or more powerful, and according to that, the value attached to the FRAND royalties in that jurisdiction might be more than the value attached to FRAND royalties in other jurisdictions. So that was another aspect. Now that's as far as the broad royalty calculation is concerned. But the other aspect of FRAND royalties is the base. So FRAND is a combination of royalty rate and royalty base. Rate is, as I've discussed in the last 15 to 20 minutes, base is either you fix the royalties on the basis of, or on a percentage value of the entire handset, so the entire market value of the device of the product, or you keep it on the percentage value of a smallest saleable patent practicing unit. Like, to give you an example, in a mobile phone, it would be the chipset. So in the chipset, if there is a certain patented technology, then primarily it is the chipset that is using that technology. Why are we using the entire phone here? For fixing the amount of royalties to be to the patent holder. If the contribution is limited to just the small bit, that is the chipset, and the camera and Bluetooth and other features are completely disconnected with this patented technology, then why should the innovator be given the benefit of licensing or getting royalties on the basis of a certain percentage of the entire handset value? So that was another aspect. So one rule is EMVR, entire market value rule, that is the entire handset being considered as the base value for fixing the royalties like 2%, 1.2%, 2.5%, so on and so forth of the total handset value. And the other aspect is the smallest saleable patent practicing unit, or the SSPPU. Now, the SSPPU is where the implementers are more satisfied because they feel that a handset has so many features, so many technologies brought together under one roof. So why should we pay a certain value percentage of the entire handset to every single person whose technology has been made a part of our device? We will license them, or we will take the license or pay that licensing fee on the basis of that small chipset, and that is the smallest saleable patent practicing unit. Now, market practice, if it be considered in such cases, is to fix the royalties on the basis of the market value of the handset. They don't delve much into the value of the smallest saleable patent practicing unit. And even if I look at the cases that I've just discussed, in both Microsoft and Motorola, in Microsoft versus Motorola and in Re Innovatio, the US courts had mentioned that the licensing would be done at the chipset level or at the smallest saleable patent practicing unit level. However, in the other cases, Ericsson, CSIRO versus Cisco, Unwired Planet, and TCL versus Ericsson, each of those four cases, the royalties were fixed according to the base as EMVR, or the entire market value rule, which means that handset is to be kept as the base, and then you calculate the royalties according to a certain percentage of the handset value. However, in TCL versus Ericsson and CSIRO versus Cisco, both the cases, the court had mentioned the fact that we can move on a case-to-case basis in deciding the royalty base. So there's no hard and fast rule in terms of SSPPU as the base, as in the chipset as the base, or the entire handset value as the base, provided if a person can justify, if an innovator, if a patent holder can justify that the value of a certain product is attributable to the single patented technology that that person has, then definitely he has a strong claim for asking for royalties based on a certain percentage value of the end market device or the value of the handset. But if you cannot justify that value of your patented technology is actually flowing to the, or is contributing to the value of the, or the pricing of the end product, then unfortunately there are other people also who have a stake to get a stake in terms of getting certain amount of royalties out of that single handset. So apportionment can only be done when apportionment is derived out of the contribution of the technology in a particular device. If the contribution is limited to a particular feature, let's say just the camera, then Bluetooth or gaming or other stuff which is in today's date available with smartphones, then these are totally unconnected. Then why should a person get the benefit of the percentage value of the entire phone? And why should the implementer be disadvantaged here? That he's having to pay 1.5, 2%, 3% to multiple people. So much so that 60% of the value of the handset is going to, in terms of royalties, to these people. And the remaining 40% also he's having to kind of negotiate his profit with. So implementers are always in favor of SSPPU as the royalty base, that let the licensing be done at the chipset level. Whereas the the innovators are always in favor of EMVR because they find it very simple. Our technology is central, fundamental to the functioning of a handset, which is why we want that the licensing should be done or the royalty rate should be fixed at the handset level. Now, all this was debated. All this was market practice, which was happening either at the SSPPU level or the EMBR level. But the role of, other than the courts, so even before the courts come into play, the role of standard setting organizations becomes very important. And when I talk about SSOs, the most important aspect of SSOs are their IPR policies. What are these IPR policies? Basically, they are a part of the bylaws of the SSO. So it's like a sort of a governing structure for the SSO, from which the SSO derives its entire functioning, the entire working, the procedural bit and the working bit of an SSO, the functioning of different study groups, working groups under the umbrella of an SSO are all going to function within the realm of an SSO IPR policy, or we also tend to call it SSO patent policy, because we are sticking ourselves to just the patents bit. Under the IPR policies, FRAND is mentioned. Under the IPR policies, the fact is mentioned that not necessarily, let's say, what is fair, reasonable, non-discriminatory, but the fact that the patent holder undertakes to grant licenses on terms that are fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. So it's flowing from that, and also that the moment a person gets to know that there is a technology that the person owns, which is essential to the licensing of, essential to the development of a standard, and without that particular technology, a standard cannot be developed. At that very moment, they will disclose that technology to the SSO, say that, okay, here we have the technology, you may use it, right? And in return, we agree to license this particular technology on FRAND terms. However, SSOs do not define what is FRAND, which is why all these disputes happen. Because had SSOs defined FRAND, there wouldn't have been a problem. And that's exactly the issue with competition agencies and antitrust agencies around the world as well. They say most of this conduct, which is of the dominant position, because when innovator is in a position of dominance, when technology has already become a part of the standard and there is no way back, innovators tend to abuse their position of dominance and tend to coerce implementers into taking licenses at rates which are not very favorable, which are far away from FRAND, objectively speaking, of course. But they are trying to kind of misuse their position of dominance here, which is why the competition angle comes in here, and the antitrust scrutiny starts to hover around this entire SSO functioning. So the point being that SSOs are more or less silent on FRAND. Most SSOs, or in fact, more than 90% of the SSOs in today's day, since the beginning of 90s, since 1992, 1993, that's when the first SSO IPR, formalized IPR policy came about. SSOs have been silent on what is FRAND. And they are the primary bodies which are responsible for the development of standards, which entail that licensing will happen on FRAND terms. And these bodies are not really specifying what is FRAND. In 2015, and this is the last part of my my discussion. In 2015, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, that is the IEEE, one of the largest technological or technical body of engineers around the world, if I may call it, based out of the US. They basically amended their IPR policy, their patent policy. After a long time, there was a major change. And to everybody's surprise, they ended up defining what is reasonable. So in a way, they ended up defining what is FRAND. There were a few things that they mentioned. Nothing was new as such, so to say, because it was already being debated in the judicial circle. But yes, in a formalized manner, to put it in black and white is something which was unprecedented, at least as far as SSOs are concerned. So what did IEEE's IPR policy say? They said, FRAND will be determined prior to the development of a standard. So FRAND rate will be determined prior to the development of a standard. That means at the ex ante stage, not at the ex post stage. So ex post is post the development of standard, ex ante is prior to the development of standard. They said the FRAND rate will be determined at the ex ante stage. So that's prior to the technology being included as a part of the standard, which means no gains from the inclusion of the patented technology in the standard will flow to the innovators. So your royalty rate will be based on the contribution of your technology in general, the value of your technology in general. This could be perhaps the value of your technology at an incremental level as opposed to your nearest rival or nearest competitor. Second, reasonable rate will involve calculation of royalties based on the value of the smallest saleable compliant implementation rule. According to the smallest saleable compliant implementation rule, this was on the same lines as SSPPU, or the smallest saleable patent unit. So for once, an SSO went ahead and threw down the gauntlet saying that, well, you better license on terms that are basically according to the smallest saleable patent practicing unit rule, or the smallest saleable compliant implementation rule, which means that the smallest component of a mobile phone where your technology is being embedded, or patented technology is being embedded, that is the value that basically will be involved in fixing the FRAND royalties. So the door was shut on royalty licensing taking place on the value, or based on the value of the handset, which was a big setback for patent holders. And there was a lot of opposition to these amendments from primarily the innovators, because they felt that this would essentially involve all the gains from standardization flowing to the implementers and nothing to the innovators. Innovators will be limited to just the volume effect. That my technology is a part of the standard, which means that standardized products are going to be manufactured at a large level in large numbers, which means that I stand to gain a lot only out of the large numbers of mobile phones that will be sold in the market, and the royalty will come to me, but I will not get any gains out of the value of the handset. That was the problem. This was anti the market practice. This was anti the asking, let's say the aspect of the demands of the innovators. So there was a lot of back and forth between the innovators and the SSO, that is IEEE, and it has been more than 5 years now, almost 5.5 years now, since the amendments took place in February 2015, and I must say that even today there is no clarity on whether the amendments have had a positive effect on the standard development process. Because if I go by what people like Ron Katz-Nelson, David Tesse, Edward Sherry, George Ephraimidis, Kirti Gupta, whatever they have written, it seems as if it has had a negative effect on the standard setting process, number one, and on the speed at which standards were being developed in least at IEEE, and that this was a very restrictive sort of interpretation given to FRAND, which probably could have considered the fact that in certain cases where technology is attributable, or the value of the handset is attributable to a single technology, or if a person is buying a phone only because it has a 70 megapixel camera, and that is the single biggest factor for that person to buy that camera, then the technology that is responsible for that 70 megapixel camera, the owner of the technology must stand to get a certain royalty based on the value of the handset and not the value of the area within which the camera is embedded. So that was the point basically. So as things stand, there is still a debate going on as to what exactly FRAND is, but it's better left on a case-to-case basis, as things have been in the past, because the US, UK, and EU courts do not seem to be on the same page in terms of how FRAND is to be calculated. Yes, there are other issues as well involved in terms of FRAND, like the aspect of injunctive relief and anti-competitive conduct, like the aspect of disclosure, like the bigger aspect of how SSO IPR policies should be molded, and whether SSOs should at all play a role in FRAND negotiations. But unfortunately, due to the paucity of time, I would have to end my talk here with this aspect of FRAND, and I'll be happy to take any questions that might have come. And in case there's a possibility, I could basically hold another session on the anti-competitive aspects of FRAND licensing in the future, wherein I could discuss about competition law and injunctive relief and similar issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor, for this amazing webinar. And we have few questions from the attendees today. So the first question is from Tanya, and
Sure.
she's saying, can you give some insights on tying and bundling of SEPs?
Yeah, SEPs. Okay, okay.
Yes,
All right. So can I address the question now?
yes,
Okay,
Professor, you
okay.
can.
All right. Yeah, yeah, sure. Thank you. Okay, so tying and bundling is another concept that is there in under the aspect of SCPs. However, Frand has basically pretty much taken over the entire discussion away from bundling and tying, because also there are other aspects of anti-competitive conduct involved. What happens usually is that there are SEPs and there are non-SEPs. SEPs are the patents that are essential for the development of a standard, and without licensing those SEPs, no implementer who is looking to manufacture a standard compliant product can go ahead and commercialize that product unless and until the person has of course sought a license. Now, because SEP holders know that without their technology being licensed, nobody can move forward, or nobody can move ahead in terms of the supply chain, or let's say in the technology vertical, or reach the market or the end consumer, or commercialize their products. What happens is they tend to indulge in anti-competitive conduct. This anti-competitive conduct could be at different levels and of different nature. One of the important aspects of anti-competitive conduct or abuse of dominant position also is tying and bundling. So what they might end up doing is they might end up putting together certain non-SCPs, which basically they know they wouldn't get too much money for as royalties, or they are not very relevant patents. So they are there, they are patents as such, but they are not really in the category of SCPs as yet. And also they might be falling in that category which are difficult to license. So what these people tend to do is they create that bundles of SCPs and non-SCPs, and they put this proposal before the implementers that if you want to license our SCPs, you also have to take this other set of patents along. I mean, you have to license the other set of patents also along with the SCPs as non-SCPs, of course, but it's a bundle. So it is 1+1. You cannot just take one and the price is half. So what they will do is they will put two with one, and together these two would probably be charged at 1.75, not 2. So some discount, but that 0.75 extra that you are asked to pay, you don't want that. It is being forced upon you. So what they tend to do is they tend to club SCPs and non-SCPs, and then they'll sell it to you as a bundle, and they'll say you want, take both of them together. We will not give you one, or one is not available. So that's also sort of forcing the other party into taking something which the other party doesn't even need. Maybe that patented technology is not even required by the person. You are forcibly asking the person to buy them, which again is a problem. So that's what is the issue of tying and bundling under SPs.
Thank you, Professor, for answering the question. So the next question is from Vaibhav. He says, what is the situation now in India and Europe regarding the choice between EMVR versus SSPPU?
Okay, very good question, very well valid question. Actually, I wanted to talk about India as well, but due to the paucity of time, I thought if I end up going into that discussion, it'll entail another 45 minutes or so of talking. Okay, so the thing is that India at this point in time, SCP jurisprudence isn't at the kind of level that it is in the EU or the US. However, India has seen plenty of SCP cases in the last, I would say, 7 to 8 years. Although they go back to 2011, that's the eyeball case. But primarily it started in 2013, 2014. So I would say 7 years to be active. All of the cases have involved Ericsson as the so-called patent holder, and we have had implementers on the other hand, primarily Chinese companies and Indian companies. Now, in India, the biggest problem is that as far as EMVR and SSPPU is concerned, there is a lack of consistency between what the Delhi High Court has said and what the CCI has said. So the cases have been heard at both levels because there have been instances of abuse of dominance complaints before the CCI by implementers like Intex, like iBall, like Gioni, Micromax, so on and so forth. And on the other hand, Ericsson has dragged all of them to the Delhi High Court. So, I mean, in no particular order, I'm naming all these companies. But what has happened is that the Delhi High Court has said that licensing, or the Delhi High Court has granted interim injunctions in most cases. The only case that has been decided conclusively up until now is the Philips case, Philips versus Rajesh Bansal and Bharti Electronics. But other than that, all these cases have had either out of court settlements or interim injunctions. In each of those interim injunction orders that have been issued by the court has granted royalties on the basis of EMVR, so the market value of the end product. However, when we talk about the CCI, every time the CCI has mentioned that the correct royalty determination is would rather be based on SSPPU, because it seems as if the technology contribution, according to the CCI, although there is no justification to this effect. So there is no justification from CCI why it should be SSPPU. But the argument that is brought before the CCI is there is abuse of dominance here because they are in a commanding position. They are charging royalties on the basis of EMVR, which is unfair. So the CCI probably, shielding our own companies, the companies that are owned backyard, most of these are local companies or subsidiaries of Chinese companies, Indian subsidiaries of Chinese companies. In fact, in most cases, the CCI has ruled that the correct royalty base should be SSPPU. So there is a definite, mismatch here or a lack of consensus here between the Delhi High Court and the CCI, which is another issue. Because if this continues to be the status quo, then the problem is we will never have clarity on why one is being picked over the other. There is no problem in Delhi High Court siding with EMVR as the market practice. Basically, you could just say that's the market practice, easy to determine. Who will go into the depths of looking at what is the smallest saleable patent practicing unit in every handset, in every device, in every gadget? It's not easy. It will require a lot of time. It will require money. It will require hiring of experts, technicians, so on and so forth. Maybe court-appointed people. However, when we talk about EMVR, very simple, straightforward. Handset value everybody knows. 20,000 rupees, 30,000 rupees, 50,000 rupees. Just fix the price. 2% of the royalty, or 3% of the amount, or 4% of the amount, whatever it is. But my issue is no justification. No justification as to why SSPPU. You give us a justification, absolutely fine. You give us a justification why EMVR is not the right royalty base, no problem. But the court's reasoning in Ericsson cases has been market practice. Whereas in case of CCI, they have always sided with Indian companies, and there's no harm in that. Of course, you wouldn't want a multinational company to come and bully your own company, companies in your own backyard, left, right, and center. But some rational justification, because we need to move forward. Since the DIPP discussion paper in 2016, which now is DPIIT, the name has changed, we have had no development, absolutely nothing in 4 years. A DIPP discussion paper is floated, comments come from Indian academics, from Indian industry people, US academics, European academics, UK academics, people working in big multinational companies and innovate, some of the biggest innovators in the US and EU. What happens? Zero follow-up. No clarity till date on whether we have a certain royalty based preference. No clarity on where are we in terms of our position on the FRAND map as such. So yes, there is some amount of problem at this point in time in how FRAND is being developed in India, or how FRAND is in for development. But maybe FRAND will again gather pace when 5G discussions begin, because at this point in time, even 5G is uncertain. We don't know when 5G is going to be rolled out. Spectrum allocation and everything is soon going to be around the corner. But the problem is SCP licensing will soon be the hot topic, because we will have automotive licensing. So your smart cars, or let's say connected vehicles and all of that, and IoT, all of that is going to require SEP licensing. So at some point, India will have to have some clarity on how we go forward from here. We cannot keep on relying on countries like the US and EU. They are way, way, way ahead of us. We should rather copy the model that is being followed by China. Curate a framework for ourselves with respect to SEP licensing. That's what they've done under Guangdong guidelines. So something of that sort is required.
Thank you, Professor, for this explanation. Now we have another question from Ranjit, and he wants to know the clear position about the recognition of the utility models like the patent system by the government of India.
So if I could basically, I would want to understand this question a little bit better, because it seems like a very broad question. So how,
Yeah,
I mean, how?
Yeah, so he has given a little background of
So
saying that he thinks that it is really important period. It's really important during the period of COVID-19, and thereafter in the backdrop of the ever increasing incidences of the incremental innovation in the industry and business process. So he's kind of relating it to how the utility model will work.
Yeah, could you please repeat the first question again? So what was asked? I mean, what did he ask earlier? So I
says that he would be happy to learn a clear position about the recognition of the utility models like the patent system by the government of India.
So, I mean, I would have to digress from my topic a little bit here to answer that question. If I may, have a one-on-one conversation with the person who's asked this question, because I don't think I will be able to relate this question to the topic that I have just delivered. It's a different discussion, utility models and COVID and how the patent system is in India at this point in time. I mean, I would rather be happy to connect with this individual. So this, with due respect, I mean, you could furnish my email to him, and I would rather happy to answer the question on a one-on-one level, because it isn't directly connected to my talk today. So I would be rather digressing from that. So I don't mind answering that question, but I would rather be happy to address this question one-on-one. So my email be furnished to him, so I can just connect with him.
Okay. So Professor, the next question is from Diksha, and she says that when we're talking about SEPs, only the standardized patented part is used in the new product. So how is it justifiable if innovators claim royalty over the physical feature included by the implementers?
Okay, a good question. So the thing is that what happens in this particular case is that standard essential patents basically could be of any kind. I mean, if you're talking about that, so I am focusing specifically on the ICT sector, information and communication technology sector. So if we're talking about the ICT sector, we are talking about primarily patents that are to do with, communication technology, which will involve mobile phones and maybe, IoT in cars, in the coming times, or already we have some of these connected cars. What is happening here basically is that innovators look at what is the easiest way to license, what is the easiest way to negotiate, at the same time, which is the most beneficial outcome for them in terms of getting adequate returns on investment. So if we look at adequate returns on investment, we are directly connecting it to your R&D. And when we're connecting it to your R&D, what we basically require is, I have invested $100,000 on developing a particular technology. Now, I want royalties quickly, and I want higher royalties. How can I satisfy these two conditions? The best alternative for me at this point would be to push for my case with with the implementer that let's license on the value of your handset. I might come down in terms of the royalty rate. I might end up settling for something like maybe 3% or 4%, but imagine 4% of an Apple phone is a huge amount of money. But on the other hand, the other aspect is, if we talk about SSPPU, it's easier said than done, because you could argue that when your technology is only contributing to a small component of a device and is not really driving the demand for that product in the market, not the entire product. So basically, it's not like, iPhone's demand is not dependent on just the camera. The latest iPhone has 3 cameras at the back and a flash. Do you think people end up spending 1,20,000 on that phone just because there are 3 cameras? Some people spend it because of the brand value. Some people spend that money because of the fact that there's a certain status symbol attached to it. But most people end up spending that money primarily because there are the overall features that are there in an iPhone. No single feature is responsible for driving the market for an iPhone. But I compare the same case with these Chinese phones. You have your Vivos, Oppos, Xiaomi, this, that, all of these brands. 108 megapixel camera, 82 megapixel camera, 100 megapixel camera. Now, a phone which basically is being sold for 10 or 12,000 rupees as a 100 megapixel camera, a lot of people might end up buying that phone based on the 100 megapixel camera because the rest of the features are pretty much normal. There, you can have a claim for the entire market value being the royalty base. But in a phone like Apple or Samsung, where camera is not the driving factor, at least in a phone which is priced at 90,000 or 1 lakh rupees, the aspect is you as the implementer will try to justify that your technology solely is not responsible for driving the value of a phone that we are manufacturing. Right? It is the other features as well, but it has been observed since early 1990s, and then the onset of 2000s and more technological developments taking place, and primarily from this period starting from 2011-2012, when we had the first case pertaining to SCP licensing in India, and then 2012 Microsoft versus Motorola happened at the large scale level in the US. Since then, the debate has been ongoing, SSPPU or EMVR. The justification for EMVR could be there in a lot of cases because it's the market practice. And a lot of the times courts look at, while deciding on a particular issue of such a nature, courts look at the licensing negotiations leading up to the case being brought to the court of law. So when the parties were negotiating it amongst themselves, what were the negotiations revolving around? And in most cases, the negotiations are already revolving around the handset being the royalty base. Then now the implementer cannot push for a case saying that, oh, no, we were negotiating, but in essence, I want the licensing to happen at the SSPPU level. So you can't have both the options at your disposal. So the courts, while determining FRAND, look at various things, and that also involves the negotiations between the parties leading up to the dispute, because nobody's going to file a dispute straight away. They will first basically, talk amongst themselves, negotiate, because SSOs are not getting involved here, courts are not getting involved here. It's the parties, innovators and implementers. And the market practice has always been licensing on the basis of the handset value. So that's what the courts also tend to go with. And where the courts have a doubt, they will ask the parties to prove basically why it should be EMVR or why it should be SSPPU. You tell us. Whichever party is able to justify it, there you go. So TCL versus Ericsson and CSIRO versus Cisco were two such cases where the courts gave a very rational reasoning that you could have either SSPPU or EMVR as the royalty basis depending on what you can prove vis-a-vis the contribution of the technology. And rather, this is how it should be, where you can prove that the technological contribution is towards the entire handset, licensing on the basis of basically EMVR. where the contribution is only on the base or only towards that particular component, let's say the chipset in a phone, why should you be getting the benefit of a percentage value of the entire handset, the market price? So that's the argument.
And thank you, Professor. Thank you for answering the questions. As we are short on time, we won't be able to take any further questions. But thank you so much to all.
Okay, so yes, so on that note, let me just quickly thank everybody who joined in, and I would be happy to answer any questions that there may be. I am accessible on LinkedIn by the same name, and people can look it up. And you can also furnish my email ID, official email ID, to anyone who you like. So no problems there. I'll be happy to address all questions that are still pending over email. More than happy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much to all the attendees for joining us today for this lecture series. Professor, do you want to give them any end note about the topic for today?
Yeah, so what I would like to say here is that the aspect of the discussion revolving FRAND and licensing of SEPs at India still is at a nascent level. We have had the opportunity to cash in on all of this. We've been given that opportunity, we've been afforded that opportunity in the last few years, but unfortunately it hasn't seen the light of day. But I'm sure that there is a lot to look forward to, because we are at a very crucial juncture in the history of technological development, and where we see ourselves on the innovation index. India used to be at number 81 in 4 years back. In 4 years time, India rose to 52. So that jump of 29 odd places basically speaks volumes about how we have been proceeding on the lines of innovation. And we definitely have a lot to take in from China, because China not that long ago was pretty much at the same position that we are. But suddenly they realized their potential, and they felt that if jurisdictions like the EU and the US and the UK are able to basically maneuver their way around or to the top of the innovation chain through their own SSOs, through their own policies, through their own governance, then so can a country like China. And they've already shown the direction to most of the other countries, most of the countries in the developing world. And Guangdong guidelines very recently were devised by China, which basically talk about the aspect of SEP licensing in detail. So maybe I would advise some of our viewers or our people who joined us today, to the participants, to basically look at the Guangdong guidelines on SEPs in China. And the other thing is the EC communication paper. So European communications discussion paper or communication paper in Europe, and that came in 2017. So these two documents would really help in develop a better understanding of where we are in today's state, or how has FRAND jurisprudence developed, or jurisprudence involving FRAND has developed over the last a decade or so. So that's what I would like to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us today. And once again, thank you all the attendees. Stay home, stay safe, take care. See you next week. Thank you so much.